Remember Clubhouse, the app that blew up during the pandemic? Well, I worked there for a year as a strategic finance and business operations manager. In this video, I'm gonna share with you my key career lessons that I took away from the experience. Just a quick disclaimer, and I think this is true for every career tuber you watch. I can't and won't share like the spiciest stuff that I could share. This is in part because of confidential information, but it's also because it's somewhat tacky and inappropriate to expose every little detail about the inner workings of a company. It's kind of like talking shit about your ex. Let's dive in. Number one, powerful lesson. If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. People tend to reach for tools that they're most familiar with, not the ones that are necessarily the most appropriate for the situation. Bankers want to whip out Excel and calculate ROI and TAM. Consultants want to put together a 50-page beautiful deck with a SWOT analysis. Data scientists want to crunch numbers and run A/B tests. PMs and engineers want to build a new feature using new tech. At any given time, these may or may not be the right, appropriate solution for the problem at hand. I've seen bankers turned founders do TAM ROI analysis in a spreadsheet to decide what new feature of the product that they should build, just to have no customers give a shit at all. That founder was me. Pretty cringe. I thought this was just a banker thing. Turns out it's not. It's true of most specialists that come from a more scaled, mature company environment. This depends on what stage your company is at. If your company is pre-product market fit, you should really be focused on user interviews, user research, and testing your product in front of a lot of different users. Bankers and consultants don't have this skill. They're used to helping Fortune 500 companies that already have scaled. I thought people from FAANG companies would know this too because it's more tech and software related. But guess what? That's not necessarily the case. These big tech companies are also mature Fortune 500s. When you're used to being a specialist and crushing it, it's not intuitive to you that when a problem comes up, you can Google or reach out to your network to say, hey, how do I do this new thing? How do I find people to interview? How do I go onto college campuses and have a startup pop up? How do I recruit influencers and streamers? So my first big lesson, going from 0 to 1 is such a entrepreneurial specific skill. If you're at a startup, make sure you're tackling your problems from the problem first, not from your toolkit first. If you don't have the right tool in your toolkit, ask someone within your company. If they're not in your company, ask someone in your network. If they're not in your network, then let people know that you're learning it yourself. Number two is a hot take. I learned that I prefer going into the office. My ideal scenario would be going into the office 2, maybe 3 times a week with the option of being flexible some weeks. Clubhouse worked on a remote-centric model, not just a remote-friendly model. This meant that we hired from anywhere and you were never required to come to the office. The company also did a great job of investing in flying people out so that we could meet and bond at regular intervals. Man, I really did enjoy being remote-centric for the first few months. I could work for everywhere I wanted. There were several people that constantly moved to different cities. It was really cool to see incredibly talented people from Australia and Europe and South America be my colleagues. The flexibility and savings that you have on not commuting all the time, not being forced into a rigid schedule that doesn't necessarily correlate to your work performance, I think all those things are great. But the things that I really miss is having a physical space and community that I get to regularly interface with. It might be because I'm a bit of a workaholic. I really do enjoy working more than 60 hours, like 60 to 80. I'm at my desk for those hours, and it's a lot better when you have water cooler talk. You can chit chat and shoot the shit about this TV show and that sports game. Clearly, I don't really watch sports. We're social animals, and I think there's a lot of benefit to physically interfacing with another group of humans that you share values and humor with on a regular basis. I think it's better for your mental health. It's harder to have difficult conversations with your coworkers in a remote-only setting. Any workplace, you will have disagreements and need to debate some decisions out. At a startup, it might actually be essential to your survival. In a remote setting, you're not shooting the shit and having fun and getting to know each other outside of a purely professional context. When there is a central office, it's much more natural to have a social relationship, even with people that you don't work with on a regular day-to-day basis. So if you need to convince a different department head or disagree with another team member, in an in-office setting, you may have 10 interactions that are great, followed by one difficult conversation. In a remote setting, there isn't this buffer of having positive to neutral interactions on a day-to-day. You have that one difficult conversation, and then you don't actively talk to them for another 3 months. It's so crucial to have tough conversations, and I think a remote environment does make that harder. My hair is like whack today, so I'm gonna put a hat on. Anyway, number 3, startups are better at rewarding self-starters. At Clubhouse, I joined as the strategic finance manager. I did the bread and butter FP&A corporate finance work, but I also internally networked and asked a lot of questions. I raised my hand and did a lot of unsexy work that needed to be done in other parts of the business. This gave me leverage. This won me credibility and gave me exposure to other parts of the business, which allowed me to learn how the entire company worked. After a few months of building this leverage, I then flip and become much more proactive about the work that I want. I was able to transition into a different role that I wanted more, the business operations and strategy role, more of a generalist role focused on business processes. The reason that startups are better for this type of behavior is that there is upside for everyone. Rising tide raises all boats. At a startup, there are a million things to work on that can generate value. So if a young junior or mid-level person finds growth, finds ways to save money, they can just raise their hand and go do that. That can get the whole company closer to product market fit, closer to more profits, closer to IPO. And therefore, everyone from the intern to the CEO rewards and encourages this behavior. Since the company is growing, they have room to promote you. If you compare this to a mature company that is worried about profits and steady growth over time, they generally can't award younger and middle level employees, especially beyond more senior employees, even if they theoretically made an impact that is bigger. There's optics and politics involved in startups and big corporations, but the upside just doesn't outweigh it at the corporation. The takeaway here is that if you like exploring and trying a bunch of different things, if you like getting rewarded in line with your contributions, and if you're a young, ambitious person, you might want to think about a startup, but you might also need to consider the downsides, risk, and less structure. My 4th career lesson is how engineering departments work. Clubhouse is the first time that I worked for a true tech company with an engineering org. In the past, I naively thought that eng orgs just agreed on the best thing to build for the users, and then they went off and built it, tested it, and tried again. That's way too simple. Tech orgs are living, breathing beasts that are a interplay between many different personalities, incentives, and skill sets. There's product, design, UX, UI, research, data science, and engineers. Within engineers, there's front end and back end, iOS and Android and web. Like every human organization, there's disagreements and politics and optics and conflicting interests. The quantitative data scientist may disagree with the qualitative researcher on the next important thing to build or why something is working or not working. You can't always maximize potential user good. You also need to factor in retaining the best engineers and keeping morale high across the org, especially because it's so easy to leave and get a different job if you're a good engineer. Sourcing good ideas from everywhere is important, making everyone feel heard. You also need to factor in cost, the cost of labor, the cost of time, and the actual cost to run the tech like AWS. This is probably super obvious to software engineers, but it just wasn't obvious to me. I guess my direct takeaway is that even though I am not technical, I can still add a lot of value in these scenarios because I am multi-interested. I like talking to a lot of different people and getting them to see eye to eye, which I guess is kind of PMing or project managing. Number 5, last but not least, I am so much slower than I was in banking, but I am more impactful. Coming back to corporate America, after a stint of entrepreneurship, consulting, and making TikToks, I was out of shape in a corporate sense. It's fully a skill set to quickly intake requests from stakeholders, prioritize them, give them expectations, and deliver. On Wall Street, I was an absolute fucking athlete at this. I got this high off of like being so fast, being so good. You almost develop this like addiction to like the good job pat on the back of when the MD says, all good, send to print. So initially I was being frustrated at myself because my rate of production was definitely slower. And I think admittedly, a part of that is simply that I have lower stamina and tolerance for menial work. But I also realized that the upside was much larger. Part of the reason that I couldn't just grind 60 to 8 hours on menial work is that I have a much better understanding of how my work fits into the context of the entire company. I think I'm okay with being a cog in the machine as long as I understand how that cog fits into the machine and that the machine's headed in the right direction. What's draining is if you don't know or don't think that the work you're doing as a cog is actually helping anybody. Part of my slowness or maybe lack of motivation was because in the grand scheme of things, I knew that that work wasn't as important as something else I could be doing. So I think the lesson here is that it's okay to be slower than I was or maybe less efficient than I was earlier in my career if it means that I am much more impactful and effective. Those are my main learnings from Clubhouse. Let me know what you resonated with in this video. Also, let me know what you want me to elaborate on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.